to see, are there, for example, universal truths, just like there's some concept through Chomsky, right, that there's a universal grammar that underlies language. Many people are exploring the question of, is there some things that across cultures, across time, are a shared sense of what's right and what's wrong, and is that something that is innate, that's hardwired into the brain? And that is one perspective, right, which is it perhaps is the case that if we see a lot of different cultures, a lot of different religions, a lot of different people across history and across time sharing similar beliefs and values, that perhaps it is essential for human thriving, and that's the reason why people choose to adopt those standards and those norms, and that perhaps even we can understand religion that way, as having being motivated by some innate values. I don't know what the answers to those questions are, right? So I don't know how good the science is in that area. These are, of course, issues that we've grappled with historically. We've grappled with since the beginning of time, of what is religion, what is morality, to what extent is it actually innate versus something that is externally taught in a social construct. The area that I'm working on a little bit more is to try to ask one particular question, right? So I can't solve this entire huge debate, but I can look to start to understand what's the difference in the grammar that we have between moral responsibility. So I'm interested in just that one particular question. I mean, I'm interested in other questions generally, but I'm studying and trying to grapple with and unpack what is moral responsibility, and is there a difference between our concepts of responsibility in an area like philosophy, in an area like neuroscience, or the scientific community generally, versus our concept in law, or is there a similar idea that underlies all of them?
So why don't you at least, so tell me what you mean by moral responsibility.
So we blame and stigmatize people for acts that they do. An example is, if I go and drive my car after having several glasses of wine, and I do so in a manner that risks danger to other people, is that something that is a morally blameworthy act, such that you would say, I think that you are a bad person, somebody that I can stigmatize and say that you have done something wrong, quite apart from whether or not a police officer has ever arrested me and done a breathalyzer, and quite apart from whether or not I've actually committed a legal wrong by driving under the influence or harming any other person. And that question of, to what extent is a person responsible for their acts, and to what extent can we blame and stigmatize them from their acts, may have different meanings in philosophy and in neuroscience than it does in law. And that issue is one that I'm trying to unpack and to try to come up with a theory that might actually unify both. My view is that we've been talking about a concept of freedom, and in legal decision making, people say the concept of free will is an empty one and one that doesn't matter very much. And the people in philosophy and in science say the concept of free will matters quite a bit. If we can't show that a person has true control over their conduct, right? If we can show that there is a scientific basis for the reason that a person acted the way that they did, then you can't assign to them blame, responsibility, and stigma. And likewise, in law, you shouldn't be assigning to them blame, responsibility, and stigma. And my view is that there may be a richer concept that we're using in law for freedom, and that concept is one that allows us to find people both legally responsible as well as morally responsible.
Okay, but let me just play devil's advocate and use an absolutely basic and rather crass formulation, which is that, if you don't have the concept of freedom of will, this all turns out to be a can of worms, doesn't it? How can you run a system without?
Well, that's my point, which is, so in law, people have taken a compatibilist approach, which is to say that even if we were to find that a person, that we could explain their behavior based on their brain or their genes or their environment, nevertheless, there would still be a good consequentialist reason for holding them responsible, which is they have in fact committed a criminal act, and it is necessary for us to have a functioning society and to protect the general welfare of society, and that to do so we have to choose to hold certain people responsible, which may mean incarcerating them, which may mean treating them, which may mean punishing them. Whatever it is, there may be a good consequentialist reason for holding people responsible. And scientists and philosophers often throw their arms up and say, that's crazy, right? If we can actually show that a person isn't free, then you can't assign blame, responsibility, and stigma to that person. And I think that there is more than just a hard compatibilist approach that we could take in law, which is to say that there is a difference between freedom of choice and freedom of action. If a person has the ability to act freely and identify with their actions, and that is both a sufficient basis to hold them morally responsible as well as legally responsible.
Okay, now you think about these things all the time, philosophers do, but I mean just for a general audience as well. A utilitarian position, a consequentialist position. How do you deal with the problem that when do you end the sum of consequences? When do you say that you've finally reached the end of all the possible consequences and therefore are able to make a decision?
Yeah, so I mean, people have rich theories of utilitarianism that help them answer these questions. I draw more from utilitarianism and consequentialism and moral philosophy than I have developed a full theory of utilitarianism, but of course that's one of the biggest objections to utilitarianism is which costs do you count, right? If utilitarianism is about the greatest good for the greatest number of people, how do we count what the benefits of the system are versus what the negative attributes of the system are, the costs. And most people would say that the most direct costs, the ones that you can measure, and the most direct benefits are the ones that should be included, and very remote benefits and very remote costs are difficult to attribute to the choice that you've made. And so you have to draw the line at ones that are high probability and most directly related rather than low probability and least directly related to the issue that you've resolved.
So